And when we speak of liberation as indigenous peoples, peoples of the land is the key, the very essence of liberation. And that goes to the theme for tonight. Manifest destiny, genocide. Two sides of the same coin. Maybe the place to begin is in 1890. Why 1890? Because a census was conducted in that year. In that year, it was found, they actually went and counted, that there were fewer than 250,000 American Indians continued to be alive within the territorial portion of the continent, is what I'm trying to get to here, the U.S. portion of North America. And then a caveat in that census report of 1890, it was pointed out that while all of the area in question had been what they called aboriginal holding, roughly 2.5% remained so. You got 2.5% of the original land base remaining at least nominally in native hands. You've got 250,000 surviving people in whose hands that 2.5%, which translates to roughly 50 million acres, continued to be held. Now there's an interesting little technique that goes into this. What sense can we make of it? Because it's very explanatory. And the sense you can make of it begins with the question of how many people there were that occupied that 100% of the land. When you talk about 100% of the land in native hands, how many hands did that imply? And if you're of my age, and there's people in this room who are, you will remember that there was a very simple answer to that. North of the Rio Bravo, which some people call the Rio Grande, and build iron fences along, materials bought in China. Interesting patriotic gesture that. Beginning at that river and going north to Baffin Island and including Greenland, they said. Interesting geography here. North America begins at the Rio Grande. I thought it went all the way down to the Isthmus of Panama. But hey, different geography. Wasn't Anglophone held land south of the Rio Grande. So we only count things north. We just rearrange geography to conform to political realities apparently. That entire landmass, which if you think about it is huge, only 1 million people. Squalid, Stone Age, hunter-gatherers wandering nomadically about the landscape, the bare margins of subsistence, generation in, generation out, waiting for civilized people to come along and teach them how to feed themselves, apparently. Only 1 million people dispersed across the landmass as broad leaves most of the land vacant. Well, more lately they talked about there having been 2 million people. Or even 3, the Smithsonian Institution will admit. Well, the daring souls, they're talking about a possible upper limit in the stratosphere of 5. Why is this significant? And where do you take it? Smithsonian, of course, is credible because it's supposed to be a scientific institution. Anybody wants to understand the science that went into the projection of historical demography of American Indians needs to check out a book by Francis Jennings called The Invasion of America. He's got a whole chapter in there called The Widowed Land, where he talks about how these supposed scientians that work for the Smithsonian, who are credited to the Smithsonian, people like Mooney and others, had gone through not any kind of field research, nothing tangible by way of physical investigation to try to ascertain what the beginning population was. They had simply taken the current counts that appeared in the conventional histories, region by region, made a column of numbers and added them up, saying that that's our preliminary estimate. But if you look at how the historians had worked it, they kept diminishing the number. You get the first archival estimates of population on the east coast of the United States, and the numbers are very, very high. That's the people who are actually confronting the native societies that disappear like melting snow before the European onslaught, but the numbers are high. A couple generations later, you've got the onset of civilization in these areas, and they're beginning to be concerned with things like education. So you've got historians as a professional trade, and they're looking at these numbers in the archives, and they're looking around, and they're not seeing any Indians at all, and they're saying, this can't be, and if it is, it's not something that we care to try to explain in the framing of what's going to be triumphalist history, and so they just arbitrarily cut those numbers in half. The high numbers weren't plausible. Let's just cut them in half. That makes it much more workable, and that makes our narrative work. Our triumphalists were bringing progress and enlightenment to the savages, that kind of narrative. It makes it work out much better. We don't have to try to explain where all those people went. We'll explain where a much lesser number of people went. A couple generations down the road, a generation of historians do essentially the same thing. Well, they do this, cutting it in half 5 times over a period of just a little under 200 years, and that's this column of numbers that the so-called anthropologists, the scientifically driven field of anthropology, took, put in a column, added up, and come up with that whole period, or that whole area is going to be occupied by 1 million people. Retool that a little bit because it's necessary for one generation of scholars to perfect, to improve upon the work of the preceding generation. So you've got it sort of incrementally inching up now. Statistically, that's important though, because if you got 250,000 survivors of a beginning population of 1 million, that means only 75% of the population disappeared between point A and point B. If you concede that it was double that, still 250,000 survivors, they counted them. Beginning population of 2 million, the numbers look rather different statistically. The percentage is different.